Hi, my name is Heron, and I'm here to talk to you about the process of taking a piece of artwork that you maybe didn't really like that much, didn't quite come out right, recreating it and making it into something better. I'm also going to be painting some little bees while I talk about this. And finally, I'd like to thank my friend Shapay, who mentioned in the comment section that the music was a little bit loud, so I'm going to try to keep the volume a little lower for this video. It's no coincidence that I chose the bee theme design for this topic. When I first started developing this art style, I knew that I wanted to draw some joyful little bees. Seeing bees in person might be a little scary for some people, but I think bee-themed artwork has a good reputation for being joyful and happy. You know, the bees in this drawing can't hurt you. All they can do is fly over pretty little flowers and make honey and usher in feelings of a warm, sunny spring day. So I knew I wanted to draw some joyful little bees and flowers. But when I tried making a rough sketch, this was the first result. It wasn't bad, but it didn't spark joy. And that's kind of how I like to judge my own artwork. When I look at it, does it make me smile? Or is it just kind of a random picture of some bees? So when I drew this first sketch, I was making similar sketches nearly every morning. I would get up, make a pot of coffee, and while I drank my coffee, I'd make a little sketch. So when this one didn't work out quite right, I just shrugged it off and drew something else the next day. I left the bee sketch on the back burner and decided to see if I felt like coming back to it eventually. I left a note for myself among my other creative ideas that just said, "Redo bees." Months passed by. I spent the whole winter drawing in my new art style, and I created 8 polished digital pieces ready for print. Then one day I was taking a walk and the bee piece popped into my mind again. I realized that I disliked the composition, but obviously if I thought that it would look nice with the same 3 rectangles I'd been using, I would have done that already. So I did a quick Google image search of bee-themed designs. There were a lot of hexagons. I thought maybe I should try making a hexagon-shaped panel instead. It's one of those things that sounds so simple and obvious in retrospect, but the simplest ideas can be the hardest to think of. If you ever find yourself stuck on a piece, chances are that's the kind of brain work you need. Months of rumination until you figure out something incredibly simple and obvious that you've been overlooking. The other interesting detail that I think really helped this composition was making the background an off-white. Figuring out a background color for these types of pieces can be very challenging, which is why my earlier vector pieces were all solid white backgrounds. But while I was ruminating and working on other things, I was also browsing through Instagram. And a lot of the other artists I follow, especially the more veteran professionals who have this sort of a vector style, like to use an off-white background. I think there's something about a pure white background that makes people think a piece is a little unfinished or unintentional. It's more reminiscent of a website, which makes sense for me because I've developed many websites professionally. But when the background is off-white and you add an element that is pure white, like the highlight on the dripping honey, it really pops. It also creates an overall color harmony if it's in the same hue as the primary color of the piece. Finally, I decided to add a few extra details. These tiny little solid hexagons and the dripping honey coming out of the panel really brought the piece together. As a graphic designer, I often avoided using extra little details. Graphic designers often avoid adding these sort of small, unnecessary details because it can make a composition look cluttered or unprofessional. So in my earlier pieces, I tried to keep the panel design very simple. But I realized that when used sparingly, the tiny hexagons created a sense of size, contrast, and balance that was lacking in my other pieces as well. Throughout the entire process of making my artwork, I'm always trying to look at what I'm doing through a critical lens. Are the colors working? Are the shapes good? Is there enough detail? Is there too much of something? Is it not creating the vibe that I'm going for? You'll notice that the new sketch featured some poppies, but as I worked on the vector shapes, I decided to get rid of them and replace them with some grass because the colors just weren't harmonious with the rest of the piece. I have to tell myself multiple times every day, trust the process, because my work frequently goes through phases of looking pretty bad. So part of the challenge is trying to understand whether I can keep working on the details to improve a piece, or whether, like in this case, I need to start back from the sketch phase. This is something that just takes a lot of practice. When you're new to making art, you'll want to finish the details of every piece and never feel like scrapping those hours of hard work. But the more hours and hours you put into studying art and practicing, the more you start to value the finished product far more than whatever time you spent on it. Sometimes a piece is so challenging that you have to keep redoing it over a period of months or even years, and that's the process. They say you can't rush art. So that's how I took one of my less exciting sketches and turned it into one of my favorite new pieces of art. I slept on it for a while, took some notes, ruminated about what was missing, gained inspiration from other artists, and I let my subconscious tell me when it was ready to try again. The cool thing about this method of redoing pieces is that it's not restricted by time. If you made something that you really liked but wasn't quite coming together when you were 10 years old, and it's been sitting in your parents' garage ever since, try taking it out and recreating it. This is a great exercise which can improve your skills as an artist enormously. And I think it's also a good philosophy in general, which can help reshape our mindsets about failure. I could have just thrown the original sketch away and said, it's horrible, I'm a bad artist, I always mess up everything, what's the point in even trying? When I was younger, I probably would have said that. Feeling disappointed in my art used to stop me from drawing altogether for months or years at a time. The fear of failure can be so demotivating that you don't want to try at all. But this time was different. This time, I got up the next morning and drew something else. And then I got up a few months later, tried again, and succeeded. So today, let's get together and face our fears. Hopefully that doesn't include bees. If you're afraid of bees and you're afraid to recreate your artwork, this was probably a difficult video for you, and I do apologize for that. Anyway, I want to thank everybody who's been so kind to me, who's been commenting on these videos, liking, subscribing. It really makes me feel very motivated to keep making them. So I hope you have a joyful day, and I'll see you in the next one.